In this video, I'll show you two more examples on how to factor and solve quadratic trinomials. This is part 2. Remember, in order to be able to factor a trinomial, it needs to be in this format, and this is called standard form. So make sure your quadratic is fully expanded and that you can identify your A term, your B term, and your C term. Let's start with question A. You'll notice that question A is already in standard form. I can easily identify my A term, my B term's in the middle, and my C term's last. The next thing that you have to watch out for is whether your A term is anything other than a 1. Notice that the coefficient of our A term is a 1. And since it's a 1, it makes the whole factoring process a lot easier. And if it's not a 1, you have to common factor out that number first. Otherwise, you'll have to use another technique known as factoring by decomposition, and I do have a video on that. For our next step, I'm going to identify my C term, and it's minus 20, and my B term is minus 1. I have to find two numbers that will multiply to minus 20, and when you add those two numbers together, they end up with minus 1. The numbers that I'm thinking of are 5 and 4, or a combination of 5 and 4. So if I multiply 5 times 4 together, I get positive 20, so that's not allowed. If I multiply negative 5 times 4, I get negative 20. And if I add negative 5 with 4, I end up with negative 1. So that's my correct combination, negative 5 and 4. As we did in part 1, the next step would be to open up two sets of brackets. And you're going to place your independent variable, in our case it's x, into both of these brackets. And I'm going to put minus 5 and plus 4 into the brackets. Once I've done that, I'll set my equation. Right now it's equal to y to 0. So I'm going to replace this with a 0. And what I'll do next is solve for each individual x. To solve for each x, you're going to set both of these brackets equal to 0. And I explained the reason why in part 1. And by doing that, I can solve for x. To solve for x, I bring this 5 over. This negative 5 becomes a positive 5. So therefore, we have 1x at positive 5. And we have a second x at minus 4. Bringing this positive 4 over makes it a negative 4. And so there you have it. That is how to solve and factor this equation. Let's move on to B. This time our equation in B is not in standard form. Notice that it's fully expanded, that's good, but the C term is in the middle. Make sure that you reposition it so that it looks like in standard form. It's very important that you do that. It makes the factoring process a lot easier. So I've just rearranged the equation. Notice that the signs haven't changed. This is still a negative 12 and that's still a negative x. The signs only change when you bring them over to the other side of the equation. My next test is to see if my A term is anything other than a 1. Luckily for us, it's only a 1, so we can move on to the next step of the factoring process. Remember, if it is not a 1, then you will use another technique known as factoring by decomposition. The next step is to identify the B and the C coefficients. So this is the C term, it's negative 12, and the B term has a coefficient of negative 1. So I have to find two numbers that will multiply to negative 12 and add to negative 1. Those two numbers are negative 4 times 3, which is negative 12, and negative 4 plus 3 gives me negative 1. Now I often get the question, how do I know what numbers to choose? I mean, there are many possibilities. There's 12 and 1, 6 and 2, 4 and 3. Well, in this case, you just have to be good at multiplication and to quickly guess and check which one is the best combination. So now that I've found my correct combination of numbers, I'm going to reset up my equation so that it has two brackets, just as before, minus 4 here, plus 3 here. I'm going to set my y equal to 0, and by doing that, I'll individually solve each of these brackets. The first one, x minus 4 is equal to 0, and the second one, x plus 3 is equal to 0. Solving for x in each case, we end up with positive 4 and negative 3. And so there you have it. That is the factored form of this equation, and these are its solutions. If you found this tutorial helpful, please support our channel by subscribing or by liking this video. If you have any further questions, visit our website at studyforce.com. We're an online service for students seeking free homework help. See you soon.